Most people see sexuality as a private domain. They think of it as a form of closeness nourished by emotion, given meaning by the bond formed between two people, shaped by mutual desire. But in Sparta, that perspective had no value. There, sexuality was neither an individual preference nor a romantic intimacy. It was the command of the state, a duty that was not questioned, not debated, a cold arrangement serving a single purpose: to raise strong, flawless warriors. Spartans did not see themselves as free individuals, but as the product of a system. This order did not aim to raise human beings. It aimed to produce useful beings, solid bodies, disciplined minds. And the beginning of this process was neither the battlefield nor the weapons held in hand. It began much earlier, behind closed doors, in a bedroom. Let's set aside the red cloaks, the speeches echoing across squares, and the tales of heroism. Behind the myth of 300 lies an unsettling truth, a cold-blooded system of human design that makes even the harshest dystopias seem almost merciful. At the center of this structure stood total state control over reproduction. In Sparta, when it came to love or family, individual choices carried almost no weight. The state acted like the single absolute matchmaker, focused not on emotion, but on strength. Elder judges who had spent their lives on the front lines evaluated young men as if inspecting a herd. They looked at height, endurance, and lineage. A tall, broad-shouldered warrior from a strong bloodline. Opposite him, a solidly built woman with wide hips, durable, fertile. Beauty mattered not for aesthetics, but as a sign of health and clean blood. Marriages were not built on love. They were cold unions arranged by the state, focused on outcomes. Love was secondary. Desire was irrelevant. The body was not considered to belong to the individual, it belonged to the state. Every citizen's duty was to make Sparta stronger through the bloodline. The position of women was shaped by the same logic. They were seen not through the identity of wife or mother, but as the carriers of Spartan society. Their value was measured by the strength of the children they brought into the world. Spartan girls were prepared from a young age not to fight, but to give birth. They ran, wrestled, threw the javelin, so their bodies would be strong enough to carry a powerful warrior. Will was pushed to the background. What mattered was physical capability. They were taught that the birthbed was also a kind of battlefield, and that the greatest honor was to bring the future soldier into the world. This system extended to practices that today seem almost monstrous. What happened if the wife of a famous warrior could not conceive? Or if she bore weak children? And what if, in another household, there was an exceptionally healthy woman married to an old and ineffective man? Sparta had an answer to this as well. A chilling clause embedded in social law. A strong warrior was permitted, indeed encouraged, to father children with another man's wife. This was not considered adultery, it was seen as a civic duty. A woman's womb could be loaned into the service of the state, often with the husband's consent. To bear a strong child, even by another man, was an honor for both the household and Sparta. Concepts such as love and fidelity were crushed beneath a state-backed eugenic order. The aim was not happiness. The goal was the perfection of the bloodline. When a Spartan child was born, it was not considered a moment of joy. It was a process of elimination. The newborn was not held in its mother's arms. It was taken to a grim meeting place called the Lesh. There waited the elders known as the Gerousia, warriors who had seen countless battles, men capable of distinguishing life from death. The babies were examined without emotion. The naked, trembling body was inspected from head to toe. Legs, spine, cry. The slightest defect, the smallest sign of weakness could determine the child's fate. This may seem like arbitrary cruelty, but it was not. In the Spartan mind, it was necessity. In such a world, weakness was not merely an individual risk, it was a threat to the entire state. A frail infant was not a burden, but a potential danger. Today's mercy could be tomorrow's destruction. This was Sparta's belief. Survival was possible only through strength. And there were no exceptions. The council's decision was unquestionable. There was no such thing as appeal. If the infant passed the test, it was returned to its family, but not as a child, as a future soldier who already belonged to the state. From the very first breath, a Spartan child's path was drawn. If the elder's judgment was negative, if the child was deemed unfit to live, it was not killed with a sword or thrown into water. Its end was quieter, colder. The infant was carried to the bare slopes of Mount Taygetos to a place called Apothetai. There, on the edge of a dark ravine, it was left to the wind, the night frost, and wild animals. An unseen, unspoken death. According to Spartan logic, this was not murder. They believed they were merely returning the flawed to nature. What nature had created imperfectly, they offered back as a merciless sacrifice to collective strength. Earning the elder's approval was only the first threshold. From that moment on, the child's life became a slow march toward war. And for parents, duty did not end with birth. The state demanded the uninterrupted production of new bodies to feed the war machine. In Sparta, reproduction was not a right, it was an obligation. Practices that would later be called eugenic existed long before the word itself. The idea that humanity could be perfected through selective breeding was not born in the laboratories of the 20th century. It was shaped on these rocky slopes. What guided the Spartans was not hatred, but cold utilitarianism. Weakness had no place in the bloodline. To ensure this, the most intimate human act was transformed into a public duty. Love, as we understand it, had no place in this equation. Men between the ages of 7 and 30 lived with their comrades in communal barracks. Husbands would secretly slip out of camp at night, join their wives quietly and hastily, and return before dawn. There was no domestic life, no time to nurture affection. A spouse was a stranger chosen not for the heart, but for the body. The sole purpose of the union was fertilization. The system was designed to suppress attachment and direct loyalty solely toward Sparta. Strong family bonds were seen as a potential threat. Romantic love was regarded as a dangerous distraction. For this reason, those who refused to marry or reproduce were punished. A man who remained unmarried past the required age was branded disloyal and considered to have shirked his civic duty. During certain festivals, such men were paraded naked through cold streets and forced to sing songs mocking their failure. They were denied the honors granted to respected elders, ostracized, and lived as living proof that in Sparta, private life was everyone's business. The cost of this ideology was heavier than one might expect. Compassion was erased from daily life. For generations, people were conditioned to believe that softness was weakness. They were taught that the body belonged not to the individual, but to the state, that motherhood was not love, but service. As a result, children did not learn affection from their parents. They learned obedience from their instructors. When mothers handed their sons over to the state at the age of 7, they whispered only this: "Return with your shield, or on it." This was not empty pride. It was the distilled essence of a culture that tore out maternal love and replaced it with fanatical devotion to Sparta. The reproductive process did not, of course, end with birth. At the age of 7, another stage of assembly began: the true manufacture of the weapon. The state that engineered birth now effectively took possession. This marked the beginning of the harshest and most effective educational system humanity has devised. The Agoge, a system that dismantled children and rebuilt them within the mold of a flawless warrior. Imagine this. You are 7 years old, you are torn away from the only warmth you have known. Your mother hands you over silently, without tears. From that moment on, your new family is your Agel, your training unit, your cold barracks. Your father becomes an instructor who teaches endurance, not literacy. You will not live at home again until the age of 30. By then, even the word home will have lost its meaning. The first lesson of the Agoge was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. A Spartan child had to make his own bed from reeds torn by hand from the banks of the Eurotas River. Knives were forbidden. His only garment was the same coarse tunic in both the scorching heat of summer and the freezing cold of winter. And above all, he was constantly hungry. Rations were deliberately insufficient, a slow starvation calibrated with mathematical precision. But this deprivation was not cruelty, it was strategy. Children were expected to compensate for it through theft. In Sparta, stealing was not a flaw, it was a lesson. It sharpened secrecy, patience, and courage. A warrior who could not infiltrate an enemy camp unnoticed and steal food was worthless. Thus, children learned to move through their own city like shadows, to scavenge like wolves. Those who were caught were whipped mercilessly, not for stealing but for being incompetent enough to get caught. The sin was not theft. The sin was failure. The message was unmistakable. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death, not only for you, but for everyone beside you. The Agoge carved this lesson into flesh and bone. This was not merely about training soldiers, it was about producing ruthless predators. Cold, sharp, calculating, stripped of ordinary morality. In their world, right and wrong were reduced to a single question. Did you succeed, or did you fail? They learned to lie, to erase tracks, to read weakness, and to obey without hesitation. They were brothers, but brothers bound by pain, competition, and fear. Hunger and theft were only the beginning. The later lessons were far darker, designed to break and remold the child's mind. The human body adapts quickly to hunger, cold, and blows. But the true battle of the Agoge was fought inside the skull. Sparta did not want muscle alone. It wanted minds sharpened like knives, souls stripped of selfhood, loyal only to the state. After seizing the body, the instructors targeted the spirit. Their weapon was silence. The word laconic, brief speech, comes from Laconia, where Sparta was located. This was no coincidence. Spartan children were taught that words were not toys but tools. Chatter, meaningless questions, or careless remarks were punished. Teachers posed questions that demanded sharp, precise answers. Hesitation or dullness was met not with words but with pain. Sometimes an instructor would bite the offender's thumb. A small but unforgettable lesson in thinking before speaking. Silence was to be armor, and every word was to strike its target like an arrow. The harshest cruelty did not always come from elders. Often it was inflicted by the children themselves. The training pyramid ensured this deliberately. Older youths known as Irenes ruled the younger ones like tyrants. Commander, guard, and torturer fused into a single body. At meals, they set verbal ambushes. Who is Sparta's bravest man? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Is theft honorable? There were no correct answers, only traps. A pause, a wrong tone, or hesitation invited mockery and blows. Humiliation was public, constant, and deliberate. This was not random bullying. It was institutional cruelty designed by the state to produce minds that could remain cold under chaos. Every child learned to think like a politician and fight like a monster. Mistakes meant pain. Competition was fuel. Aggression earned respect. Trust no one. Expose the weaknesses of others. Hide your own. This daily brutality eventually culminated in a horrific ritual. The ceremony at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Artemis, goddess of the wild and protector of the home, demanded a bloody offering. Cheeses were placed upon the altar. In theory, the child's task was simple: run, take, escape. But to reach the altar, they had to pass through a storm of whips. Leather lashes tore through the air, ripping flesh, wounding bodies with every step. This was not a race of speed. Only one thing was tested. How much pain could a future Spartan endure without breaking? The true test was not the cheese. It was remaining silent under the lash, without screaming, without tears, without the slightest display of weakness. To cry out was disgrace. Plutarch recounts that young Spartans died beside the altar smiling. giving up their lives proudly as their blood soaked the ground. They had proven their worth. This was the final rite of the Agoge, a baptism in blood that erased the last traces of fear and softness. But when a society eliminates every weakness, what remains? When the soul is turned into a weapon, what remains of the human being? Sparta's legacy was a paradox, an unmatched military power, but emotionally hollow individuals, perfectly disciplined warriors with a warped morality. In their world, killing could be honorable. Mercy was considered a dangerous flaw. They were flawless instruments of violence, and now the state demanded proof that they could serve its darkest needs. That proof came in a practice few dared to name: the Krypteia. This was not a conventional military unit. It did not form ranks. It was something far more ominous: a secret death squad, an apparatus of terror designed to silence Sparta's internal enemies. To understand it, one must grasp Sparta's greatest obsession: control. A small class of warriors ruled over a population of enslaved helots many times their number. Spartans lived in constant fear of rebellion. Their answer was terror: calculated, preemptive, systematic. Each year, a select group freshly emerged from the Agoge. The strongest, the most cunning, the most ruthless, were sent into the countryside. They carried only a dagger and a few scraps of food. They were ordered to hide by day, move by night, and kill without hesitation. Their prey were the helots, but not at random. The bravest, the most capable, those who dared to rise above the rest, were targeted. These youths became sickles, cutting down the tallest stalks in the field. This was their final test. Killing an unarmed man in the dark was not war. It was a psychological operation, proof that mercy had been completely erased from the heart. They were no longer killing out of anger or defense, but because the state commanded it. To legitimize this, the Spartan government performed its own chilling ritual. Each year, the ephors formally declared war on the helots, a bureaucratic act with horrific consequences. Once declared enemies, killing helots was no longer considered murder. The killers of the Krypteia were not criminals, but soldiers fulfilling their duty, a convenient fiction that transformed mass slaughter into a civic obligation. When his dagger was stained with blood, a Spartan was considered fully transformed. Born as the child of the state, shaped by discipline, stripped of emotion, and now proven capable of killing without hesitation, what then remained? A defender of civilization or its most efficient predator? At the age of 30, he could finally leave the communal barracks. But this freedom was an illusion. A new duty began: reproduction. To raise new instruments for Sparta's war machine. The killer was now required to become a father. The bride chosen by the state was not to be a submissive wife, but an equal in strength and belief. Spartan women were not victims of this system. They were its pillars. While boys endured the Agoge, girls underwent their own ideological training, an equally harsh, equally purpose-driven regime. In a Greek world where women were often confined and silenced, Spartan women stood apart. They were educated, physically strong. They learned to manage property and land, because Sparta's goal was not comfort, but the production of power. Every child, every law, every marriage served a single aim: the creation of flawless warriors. Even Plato, observing from Athens, admired this order and thought it a reflection of his ideal society. But he was wrong. The goal was not equality. It was efficiency. Spartan women were shaped to suppress compassion and replace it with fiery patriotism. Their value was measured not by love, but by the quality of the warriors they gave to the state. They became legends of cold discipline. A Spartan mother would hand her son his shield as he left for war and say, "Return with it, or on it." When news of defeat arrived, other Greek mothers wept. Spartan mothers asked only one question: did we win? The tale of a woman who killed her son for returning home. In shame shows, they were not passive spectators. They were the guardians of Spartan ideology itself. Marriage in Sparta was not an act of love. It was an engineered ritual. The process resembled an abduction. The groom did not court the bride. He took her at night. The woman's attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her waiting in the dark on a straw bed. The man came in secret, performed his duty swiftly, and returned to the barracks before dawn. The purpose of this strange ceremony was clear: to preserve emotional distance, to prevent domestic affection from weakening military loyalty. The state believed that without the distractions of love and comfort, desire would remain high and fertilization more likely. This was the apex of the Spartan system. Man and woman, two products of indoctrination, united in darkness, bound not by love, but by decree. Their task was singular: to reproduce power. The pairing of the perfect soldier with the perfect mother, Sparta's human assembly line. But within this perfection lurked a slow, silent poison. For centuries, the machine worked flawlessly. Sparta ruled Greece. Its warriors were unmatched, its discipline legendary. Yet the flaw that would destroy it did not come from outside. It was embedded in the system itself. The first poison was demographic collapse. Leaving weak infants on Tegetos and rejecting every imperfection created a narrow gene pool. Every soldier lost in war was an irreplaceable loss, the destruction of decades of training and a carefully preserved bloodline. Other cities could raise new armies. Sparta could not replace even one equal. Their greatest strength, their elitism, became their fatal weakness. They were consuming their own existence. The second poison was rigidity. The Agoge produced perfect soldiers but not thinkers, warriors who executed orders flawlessly but could not innovate. As warfare changed, the system froze. In a world that required generals, they remained trapped as perfect soldiers. When confronted with new tactics and creative minds, they found themselves fighting the ghosts of their past. The final blow came from success itself. When Sparta defeated Athens in the Peloponnesian War, the gates opened. Persian gold and silver flooded the city. Wealth, once forbidden, eroded iron discipline. Land ownership concentrated. Greed replaced simplicity. Corruption seeped into every rank. Spartans who once despised luxury became enslaved to it. The Spartan spirit, built on equality and austerity, rotted from within. And then came Leuctra. On that fateful day, the Theban general Epaminondas shattered centuries of Spartan invincibility. Instead of spreading his forces, he concentrated his left wing 50 men deep and struck the Spartan right where the king stood. Innovation crushed rigidity. The unbreakable phalanx collapsed. For the first time, a Spartan king died in battle. His army was destroyed with him. Sparta's military power was broken. Having lost hundreds of its most elite warriors, the city never recovered. The empire that once shook Greece faded into irrelevance. In the Roman era, Sparta became a curiosity, an echo of a once great civilization, where travelers watched reenactments of its savage customs. In the end, the story of the Spartan reproductive system is not merely history. It is a warning about a society obsessed with perfection, willing to sacrifice everything human to achieve it. They succeeded in creating the perfect warrior, and in doing so, they sealed their own destruction. The machine that forged heroes ultimately consumed itself. What remains are only ruins, and the whisper of a greatness built on cruelty, rotted by its own perfection.